All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Iyar, anonymous sponsorship for all the Sherman Drushos this month with Akaras Atov to Hashem, for all of the blessings He has bestowed upon us, for Refuah Shlema, for Devora Leah Bas Chaya Rivka. May we all be Zocheh Me'eretz Hashem to witness the imminent arrival of Mashiach Mihera B'Yameinu. Amen. And our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Mr. Ram Meyerowitz, in appreciation for Josh Rosenblum and Jeremy Lassen for spearheading an amazing event last night. Absolutely true. Again, a tremendous shkach to everyone who attended, for everyone who was able to support. Baruch Hashem. Beautiful and enjoyable and uplifting evening, and of course we dedicate our learning in the schus of all of our hostages, in the schus of all of our soldiers, and Halavai Meretz Hashem should be a week of Besoros Tovos for Klal Yisrael. With that, let us begin. A lot to do today. A really incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Tzadik Vav 96, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Tzadik Hemabez 95b, and we left off 7 lines up from the bottom. Abaye Savala Rabbi Yoshia. Or Metaris Lekrai Rabbi Yoshia. So Abaye holds like Rabbi Yoshia. And again, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Rashi is in the wide lines, the third wide line in. Rabbi Yoshia, the Mefarish, the Bishas She'ila Ba'inan, Bishas Shvura Umeisa Lo Ba'inan. So as we're going to see, Rabbi Yoshia holds that Halacha L'maisa, again, I will say, I realized at the end of yesterday's daf, I couldn't wait anymore, so I wanted to give you the conclusion. So we did the Rambam already yesterday, right, in terms of what's the halacha of Baal of Imo, and when does the owner need to be in the employ, when does the owner of the animal need to be in the employ of the borrower. So we spoke about that yesterday. Again, the Gemara is not yet fully up to that conclusion, and the Gemara itself is still working through that sugya. So even though for us we kind of got to the conclusion yesterday, we're going to work you through a bit more this morning. So therefore, again, so the Gemara says that Abaye holds like Rabbi Yoshia, namely that the din of Baal of Imo really only requires that the owner of the animal. Okay, one step back, just to orient ourselves a little bit. What we've been introduced to in this parak is the P'tur of Baal of Imo. What does Baal of Imo mean? So the Torah literally says that if I borrow an animal from Ruvain, right? It's Ruvain's animal, I borrow it from him. If Ruvain is quote unquote with me when something happens to the animal, then halacha l'maisa I am pater. What we've been introduced to in this parak is I am Baal of Imo, the owner with me, really means that the owner is employed by me he's working for me. He's working for me at the time that something happens to the animal. The machlokes then we waded into yesterday is, what does that mean? What does that mean? That means he's employed by me or he works for me at the time that I borrow it, through the time that something happened to the animal, only at the time that I borrowed it, only at the time of the damage. So that's what we're trying to figure out, how long exactly does he need to be employed by me in order, or for what duration, in order for that p'tur, in order for that exemption to occur. The secondary follow-up with that is, when we say that the owner of the animal is working for me, so does that mean he's doing the same work as the animal, different type of work than the animal? So that's, again, all of these machlokim swirling around. Like I said, so we saw the conclusion already in yesterday's daf, but Lamaisa, the Gemara is still working through it. Okay, so therefore, Abaye, so the Gemara says, Abaye, Abaye, Savar Rabbi Yoshia, Matthias the correct Rabbi Yoshia. So Abaye holds like Rabbi Yoshia, and ultimately interprets the psukim in accordance with Rabbi Yoshia, as we'll see in just a moment. Rava, Savar like Rabbi Yonasan. Rava, on the other hand, holds like Rabbi Yonasan, Umetaris the Rabbi Yonasan, and will interpret the various psukim in accordance with Rabbi Yonasan as well. So we'll say, let's go through this. Abaye Savar like Rabbi Yoshia, Umetaris the Rabbi Yoshia. So Abaye holds like Rabbi Yoshia. So what does Rabbi Yoshia hold? Rabbi Yoshia holds that Baal of Imo only requires the owner of the animal to be in the service of the borrower or renter, whatever it is, right? Borrower, at the time that the animal was borrowed. And that employment need not extend all the way till the time of the damaging event. So the Gemara says, watch this. And Rabbi Yoshia interprets the pasuk, Ba'alov einimo shalim mishalim. So the pasuk says, if I borrow an animal from Ruvain, Ruvain is the owner, and the owner is not with me at the time that the damage occurs, So what's the halacha? Shalem mishalem, I have to pay because the owner wasn't with me. So it says, Taima delese b'tavayu. Now, we'll say, b'pashtos, what that means is like this. I would assume the default is that Baal of Imo means that the owner was with me the entire time. From the time that I rented the animal through the time that the damaging event occurred, that's when there would be exemption, which means that if the owner is not present for both, so the Gemara says, that's where there is liability. Ha'isei bechada, v'lesei bechada, but let's say again the owner were to be present at one point but not at the other. For example, let's say the owner was in my employ at the time I borrowed the animal, but he wasn't there at the time of the damage, then halacha l'maaseh again, pater. I would have thought that I'm pater. Someone says, I have a hak sev in Baal of imo lo yishalim. But the pasuk says, if the owner is not there, you have to pay. Taima de'isa b'tavayu. The reason ultimately, again, that there's an exemption is because the owner is present for both events. Again, I just want to point out, there's two events that are occurring in this story. There's the initial borrowing of the animal, and then there's the damaging event, right? The animal died, whatever it is, doesn't really matter what happened to the animal, right? The animal died, the animal broke a leg, the animal was stolen, was lost, whatever it might be. So the Gemara says, therefore the buzz v'haksev in Baal of imalo yishal in time of the Tavayu. The reason why ultimately there's an exemption is because the owner was present for both events. Ha'i isi bechada v'lesei bechada mechayiv. But it sounds like if he was only present for one of the events, that would not trigger the p'tur of Baal of Imo, and ultimately again would make you chayiv. Lo mer lecha. Therefore, again, that teaches you hayi imo b'shas she'ila eino tzarich lios imo b'shas shavura u'meisa. So I'll say, teaching is very important halacha that as long as the owner was present at the time that the animal was rented, the owner need not be present at the time of the damaging event. But if the owner was only present at the time of the damaging event, ultimately again, then the owner still needs to be present at the time of the borrowing. So Rabbi say, this is the shita of Abaye, or this is the shita of Rabbi Yoshia, in accordance with Abaye's interpretation. All right, good. Meaning what? It's only Monday. Meaning that Lamaisa, the following halacha. So I will say, what Rabbi Yoshia is saying is as follows: that at the end of the day, Baal of Imo demands that the owner of the animal be in the employ of the borrower at the time of the borrowing. That's the halacha, at the time of the borrowing. Once that happens, even if he is not together or in the employ of the borrower at the time of the damaging event, the borrower is still pater. That's called Baal of Imo. So again, a very narrow and simple definition of Baal of Imo, that I rent an animal from Ruvain, as long as Ruvain is working for me at the time that I borrow his animal from him, that is called Baal of Imo, and therefore if damage subsequently occurs to that animal, I am pater. That's it. Next, top of Tzadik Vav, 96a. Rava, Savar like Rabbi Yonasan, Umutar Sekrai Rabbi Yonasan. Rava, on the other hand, holds like Rabbi Yonasan, and ultimately again interprets the psukim accordingly. Here we go. The Sanya. In Baal of Imo lo yishalim, pasuk says, if the owner was with me, again I'm using me, I'm the renter in this case, the borrower, right? So if the owner was with me, I don't have to pay. Mashma di'ise betarvayu. So ultimately, so we would indicate, that would seem to indicate that the owner of the animal is present for both events, i.e. at the borrowing and at the damaging event as well. So the Gemara says, umashmanami, dichi ise bechada, velese bechada, pater. So I'll say also we can infer from this that even if halacha l'maisa, the owner was at one event and not at the other event, I'd still be pater. Uksiv bailav ein imo shalem mishalem. Then the pasuk says, if the owner was not with me, I have to pay. Mashma delese betarvahu. So we'll say the inference from that is bailav ein imo means that the owner is not by either of the events, not at the time of the borrowing and not at the time of the damage. Umashma techi ise bechada velese bechada chayiv. I will say from that I would infer that again, if the owner was present for one of the events, ultimately that's not enough, and therefore there would be liability. Lamar lacha, to teach you the following halacha: Hay ima b'shas she'ela ein tzarich lios ima b'shas shavura umeisa. To teach me that halacha l'maisa, if the owner was with me at the time of the borrowing, ultimately again he need not be with me at the time of the damaging event. But if the owner was only present at the time of Shavura Umesa, ultimately, again, the owner would have to be present at the time of the borrowing. So in other words, I will say it's interesting because the Gemara is arriving at the same conclusion, just the drushas are different. So I will say what's coming out over here is that although it's technically it's possible for the owner of the animal to only be present for one event, right? And not to be present for both events in order to trigger the Patur of Balavimo. But which is the event for which he must be present? It's the rental. The owner of the animal needs to be working for me, the borrower, at the time that I borrow the animal. If that happens, then even if he's not there, meaning when I say not there, meaning not working for me at the time of damage, halacha l'maisa, I am still pater. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Epoch ano. So I'll say, why can't you reverse that? In other words, let's go with the idea that based on the drashas on the Pesukim, I see that in order for Baal of Imo to be true, all I need is for the owner of the animal to be working for me at one of the two events, right? And we're saying that the event that is most crucial and necessary to trigger the exemption of Baal of Imo is the moment of the rental. That if the owner of the animal is working for me, the borrower, at the time of the rental, that triggers Baal of Imo. Why? Why should that be? In other words, why don't we say that the necessary event maybe is the Shavura Umesa? Maybe that's the halacha. So Epachana. So Mistaber She'ila Difa. So we'll say, no, I'll tell you why. Borrowing is more important. Why? Because we'll say, it's at the time of the borrowing that literally, again, my relationship with this animal is solidified, right? That's when this animal comes into my rishus, is at the time of the actual borrowing. So it makes sense that if there's going to be one event that is going to trigger the P'tur of Baal of Imo, it's going to be the moment of rental. To which the Gemara says, Adirabba, I can say just the opposite. Shavura Umeisa Adifa Shekin Chai Ba'onsim. So I say Shavura Umeisa, ultimately again, would be even more, the moment of the damaging moment should be even more important because again, I will say, as a borrower, as a shoel, I'm chayim even for ones. Ilo she'ela shavura umeisa my avid. But if there was never an act of borrowing, then there would never be liability for shavura umeisa. The ilav shavura umeisa, the Gemara says, she'ela my avid. But if nothing ever happened to the animal, there won't be the ramifications ultimately of borrowing it. Nevertheless, I will say Sheila, the act of borrowing is considered to be the dominant act, that moment. Why? Because the moment that I go and I borrow the animal is when I assume liability, or I should say responsibility for sustaining the animal. Therefore, again, that is considered to be the triggering event. Okay, so we'll say, so essentially, let's just pause here for just a moment. See here, actually, we won't pause here. Let's go back to it a little bit. Ravashi says this. The pasuk says like this: V'chi yishal ish me'imre'ehu v'lo re'ehu imo shalim yishalim. You're supposed to listen to this. So the pasuk says, if a person will go ahead and borrow an object from his friend, and his friend is not with him. Now I will say, now again, that's not actually written in the pasuk. The pasuk just says, if a person will borrow from his friend, and the way we interpret that is v'lo re'ehu imo. So put parentheses over there. And obviously when I'm borrowing it, so I'm borrowing a cow from Ruvain, and Ruvain is not with me. Not with me means that Ruvain doesn't work for me at the time that I've borrowed the cow. So and now something happens to it. Shalim yishalim. I have to pay. What can I infer from this? That if Reuven was with me, pater, then ultimately again it would be pater. Ihachi, bailav ein imo. Vim ba'alav imo lamali. So then I will say, why do I need the other drush? I need the other phrases of ba'alav ein imo. The owners are not with him. The owners are with him. We just darshaned it from this pasuk. Ilav hanach, because without these other phrases, hava amina hai orche dikrahu. I would have thought, I will say that this was just a normative expression, and it wasn't put in the Torah to be able to learn anything from it. It's kind of just like dibra Torah kalosha mene adam, just a normative expression. So the Gemara says fine. So we'll say so. Okay, so let's pause here for just a moment because now we're going to transition to a totally different case. So we'll say so. Therefore, bottom line, what are we left with? Let's just do a quick review of the information we've acquired over the last 2.5 days. Number one, Torah introduces me to a new idea, that if I borrow an animal, and by the way, it's not limited to borrowing, but we'll just use borrowing as the example of the relationship. I borrow a cow from Ruvain. As a shoel, as a borrower, what's my liability? What's my liability? Complete liability. I am liable for everything. For gneva, aveda, shvura, mesa, even ones. Chayiv for everything. The Torah says there's one p'tur, there's one exemption. What's the one exemption? Baal of imo, if the owner is with you. We now have understood what does it mean the owner's with me? What does it mean? Because when you read the pasuk, what does it sound like? What does it sound like? Reuven is my buddy. We hang out a lot together. So he's with me. Literally, it's not what it means. What does it mean? It means that the owner is working for me. The owner is working for me. And again, therefore, because the owner is working for me, therefore, Allah Chalamaysa, again, I'm pater. So I'll say, okay, so now, next, what's the definition of owner working for me? So we're just going to get to the bottom line. Owner working for me means at the time that I borrowed the animal from Ruvain, he is employed by me. Now, I could have employed him beforehand. In other words, he could have been employed beforehand, right? Or I could employ him mamish simultaneously at the time that I'm renting the animal, but at the time, or borrowing. But at the time that I borrow the animal, ultimately, again, Ruvain is employed by me. That's the halach. When you have that simultaneity, that's called Baal of Imo. As you saw yesterday in the Rambam, we paskin that employment need not extend to the time of the damage, right? Either if Ruvain left my employee, a day later, right, 2 hours later, it doesn't make a difference. Once he is employed by me at the time that I borrow the animal, that triggers the p'tur of Baal of Imo, no matter when the damage occurs. Remember, again, we also saw in yesterday's daf, just because I was rambling on to halacha, that p'tur even extends to what? Even to pshia. Even if I was negligent, halacha l'maisa, there's still a p'tur. Beautiful. Both say that's it. I mean, that's not it, but that's the package of information that we have acquired over the course of the last day and a half, 2 days. Okay, here we go. Interesting case. Shala l'Rava mahu. All right, this is an interesting case. So now I'm going to switch gears to using Ruvain as the example for this, right? Instead of myself, right? So Ruvain borrows an animal, right? And he borrows the animal for the Rava, right? It's to sodomize it. Okay, again, sometimes you have to give people credit for being honest, right? So you have to find the positive in everything, right? So he's borrowing the animal to sodomize it. Okay, mahu. So Rabbi says, so now, mahu, what do I do with this? On so many levels, what I do with this. The Gemara says, Rabbi say, now here's what's interesting. Look at Rashi, Shala l'Rava hu atzmo, mahu mechayiv ba'onseha olo. So Rabbi say, here's what the Gemara is asking. Now, he's borrowing the animal. So now, again, halacha l'maisa, the Gemara's shaila is he a shoel? Halachically, is he a shoel? Is he a borrower? Now, I remember again, like we just said, shoel comes with the highest level of liability, of responsibility. So is he a shoel? Now what's the shaila? So here we go. So the Gemara says, on one hand, kidishayli inshi ba'inan ulahagilo shayli inshi. On one hand, Rabbi say, no. In order to be a shoel, you have to kind of be borrowing something within the framework of normative borrowing. This isn't normal, and therefore, again, he does not have the status of a shoel, and therefore, again, he would not be responsible for own sin. Odoma, taimamai mishum hana, vaha nami ha isle hana. Or maybe not. So we'll say, what's the chap of borrowing something? When you borrow something, you get complete benefit. In other words, it's yours. You do with it what you want. So this guy's clearly doing it with what he wants, and therefore, again, he's a shoel. In other words, I don't really. So we'll say, you hear the shaila is like, does it matter? Does it matter that I know what he's using it for? And if it's a totally abnormal, the fact that it's also an illegal usage, I don't know if that matters or not. It probably matters, but totally abnormal. So maybe he's not a shoel because it's just like a non-normative normative act, or maybe no. The definition of being a shul means you have the right to get benefits from the object you're borrowing. He's getting his twisted benefit over here, and therefore Allah commands the shul. So okay, next case. We'll say, so we're just going to ask a series of questions over here. Sha'ala leiros ba mahu. So we'll say, this is very interesting. Let's say again, I'm borrowing an animal. Not to use it. Rather, why am I going out and borrowing it? Status. So in other words, everyone knows, right? You roll in with a cow on your side, and people are like, wow, who's that guy, right? Like, look at him. And I'll say, this was again, we'll say it's a Talmudic status symbol. I don't know, whatever status symbols we have today, right? So this was a status, in other words, it represented the idea, if you had livestock, like, it represented you had wealth. So I'll say, so what happens if I borrow an animal? But again, I'm not borrowing it to work it. I'm literally borrowing it just so people see, right? I have a business deal coming. I have some people over at the house. I want them to see the cow in the backyard. So this way, again, it's mamish just for my status. What's the halacha? So mamona b'inah v'ha'iga. So I'll say, on one hand, all you really require in order to create a situation of she'ila, borrowing, is to borrow an item of value. So borrow an item of value. That's it. It's an item of value. That's an item of shoel, and therefore I'm chai for everything. On the other hand, so the Gemara says, "Oh, dilma mamona de isle hana mine, but inon veleka." I will say, on the other hand, maybe, in order to be a shoel, it's not just enough for the item to have monetary value, but I have to be getting hana from it, and hana means something tangible. So I will say, what's fascinating about this Gemara, and therefore again, there's no hana over here. So you see something so incredible over here. Covered, in the eyes of halacha, is not considered to be a hana. So we spend so much of our lives running after kavod, right? Running after honor and glory and all different kinds of things. And it says, by the way, it's not worth anything. Such a profound Gemara. Okay, next case. So again, a whole bunch of questions. So we'll say, watch this. Let's say I went ahead and I borrowed a cow from Ruvain to do work, but it's work that's less than a pruta's value. So what's the halacha? Am I a shoel? So in all of these cases, we're trying to figure out, am I a shoel on the object to be responsible for ones? That's really what we're asking over here. So on one hand, mamona ba'inan v'ika, the item is an item of value, so I borrowed an item of value, therefore I should be responsible. On the other hand, again, I will say anything that is less than a pruta. In other words, we'll say if the stated purpose of the borrowing is for an act that is less than a pruta, so maybe this whole thing just never registers as an act of she'ila. Another question: Shal shtei paros lasos ben pruta. So let's say this is interesting. I borrow from Ruvain two cows, combined to do a pruta's worth of work. So what's the halacha? Bless you. So I'll say maybe we look at the transaction between the borrower and the owner. And when you look at the value of the transaction is a pruta. So therefore, again, I should be a proper shoel. Or maybe we don't go after the transaction, but rather we go after the objects. And also, when you look at this object, when you look at the transaction from an object perspective, each cow is doing less than a pruta's worth of work. Okay, and therefore it's not sheila. Next case, shal mishutfin v'nishal lo echad mehen mahu. So this is very interesting. Let's say I went ahead and I borrowed from shutfin, right? So again, let's say it's actually, if you take a look, shal mishutfin v'nishalo echad mehen mahu. Rashi says over here, min shutfin parashishal shnei shutfin. So let's say, so I borrowed a cow. Ultimately, again, that belongs shal mishutfin v'nishalo echad mehen. No, I borrowed a cow from two partners. Reuven and Shimon own a cow together. Now watch this. Shimon, at the time that I borrowed the cow, so Reuven came to work for me as well. Reuven's in my employ. So I'm now employing one of the owners, but not both. So the Gemara is Vinishal Echamehen, Mahu. Kula ba'ino v'haleka. So we'll say, so in order for the Patur of Baal of Imo, do I need the entire ownership of the cow to be working for me? V'haleka. Al dilma me'ahu palga didei miha miftar. Or maybe even though I don't have both owners, at least I should be able to avail myself of a partial p'tur of Baal Avimo for 50%. So we'll say, this is actually a very interesting shaila. In other words, two owners, one of them is working for me at the time of the borrowing, the other is not. Do we say that Baal Avimo requires complete ownership to be employed by me at the time of the event, or at the time of the rental, or maybe no, or maybe again, I can get a prorated, so to speak, p'tur Baal Avimo. We'll say, first wide line, Shutfin sheshalu, v'nishal le'echad mehen, mao. All right, Shutfin sheshalu, or this is the opposite case. Reuven and Shimon borrow an animal together. They're partners, and they borrow an animal together. V'nishal le'echad mehen, and ultimately, again, the owner is in the employ of one of them. Mahu, mahu, kulo shoel ba'inon v'leka. So do we say ultimately again? Rashi says over kulo shoel ba'inon she'abal nishal lechol shoel parasel. So let's say, so do we say ultimately again that he has to be? Yeah, you need full employment of the baal. O dilma bahi palga d'shayli mias miftar. Okay, next shalmei isha. We'll say third wide line. Shalmei isha v'nishal baila. So let's say this is an interesting case. I borrow a cow from a woman. We'll call her Rachel, right? Rachel's married to Ruvain. So I borrow a cow from Rachel. Now Rachel owns the cow, right? In other words, this is her property. So now what happens is interesting. So Rachel owns a cow. I borrow her cow, and she says, "Oh, take my husband also." In other words, right? Let me reframe that just a little bit. Meaning, in other words, that she says, right? Here's my cow, and my husband will come to work for you also. Interesting, right? So she's going ahead, so it's her cow, and she's sending her husband to work for me at the same time. And Ishal Baila. So we'll say, Shal Mina Isha, Vinishal Baila. If you look at Rashi says over here, Shal Mina Isha, Para Shal Nichse Malug. So the example would be that this is Nichse Malug property. Vinishal Baila Lemelachto. So we'll say Vinishal Baila, or Isha Sheshala, or for that matter, again, Rachel borrows a cow. Vinishal Lebal. And ultimately, so the woman goes ahead and borrows the cow. Rashi says, Isha sheshala. Rashi says, Lachrosh karka malog, v'nishalu habaylim lebal lemelechas atzmo. I will say, in this case over here, Rachel borrows the cow, let's say again from Shimon, and Shimon, the owner, goes into the employ of Ruvain, Rachel's husband. Now I will say, just want to point out, the chap with these cases of the marriage property, we know from our Ksuvas days, how does Nichse Malug work? And we'll see this in just a moment. Nichse Malug, I will say, the title is held by the wife, and the husband gets peiros, the husband gets usage. So that's what's interesting in these cases over here. So Rachel's going ahead and borrowing the cow to work her nichse malug property, and the owner of the cow goes into the employ of Rachel's husband, Ruvain. So you hear what's happening over here? So does that satisfy the criteria of Baal of Imo or not? Mau, kinyan peiros ke kinyan aguf dami. Kinyan peiros ke kinyan aguf dami. Olo, do we say abosai? And this is actually very interesting. So this whole, when it comes to nichse malug, we have this ongoing machlokes of kinyan peiros ke kinyan aguf. Is rights of ownership or rights of usage. That's kinyan peiros means rights of usage. Does the right of usage represent ownership or not? That's the fundamental shaila. So I'm going to Rav Ashi. So here we go. Next case. So we'll say again, we're gathering up all of these cases just in rapid succession. So the Gemara says, "Amar Rav Ashi, Haomer l'shlucho tzei v'hashali imparasi mahu." Very interesting. I say to Ruvain is my shaliach. I say, Ruvain, here's the deal. Go out and borrow a cow for me, right? Go to Shimon, borrow a cow for me, and ultimately, again, say v'hashali imparasi. No, I'm sorry. For me, right? Hashali bishvili. Sorry. Good. Sorry. How much to say hashali imparasi? So ultimately, again, this is actually interesting. So I say to my shaliach, go, and ultimately, again, go lend out my cow. And ultimately, again, go into the employ of the borrower in my stead. All right, so let me just, again, I have a cow. I want to lend it to Ruvain. Right? Ruvain's borrowing it. So I say to my shaliach, go deliver the cow to Ruvain, and I want you to go work for Ruvain at the same time that Ruvain borrows the cow. So I'm sending my shaliach in my stead, to be employed by Ruvain. So Mahu, what's the halacha? Ba'alav mamish ba'ina. So Rabbi says, here's the shaila. So now, because Ruvain's going on my behalf, he's my shaliach. So does that trigger Ba'alav imo or not? Do we say Ba'alav imo means no? Actual owner, right? And that's the case, then Reuven is a great guy, but he's not me, he's not the owner. Odilma, shlucho shel adam kimoso. I will say shlichos. Shlichos, and what's the whole chap of shlichos? The whole chap of shlichos is shlucho shel adam kimoso. Ultimately, again, a person's shaliach is just like him, and therefore, when I send Reuven, my shaliach, into the employ of Shimon, it's as if I was there. Okay, Vika, the Gemara says, Amar Rav Acha Brei Rav Avia Rav Ashi. Baal pluked Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Supposed to listen to this. So Rav Acha Brei Rav Avia said to Rav Ashi, so Baal, this case of Baal, not Baal Plugda, Baal is Plugda Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So I will say, remember again, we had two cases dealing with Nichsei Malug property, right? So the Gemara just suggests those cases and how they shake out. Remember again, there were two different cases. One case was where Rachel was going ahead and lending her Nichsei Malug to someone, and sent her husband together with the property to work for the borrower of the property, right? That was case one. And is that Baal of Ima or not? And case two, ultimately, again, is Rachel's borrowing something, and at the time that she's borrowing it, the owner of the borrowed object goes to work for her husband. So on the Nichsei Malug property, right? So we'll say, so the Gemara just suggests those cases about ownership of Nichsei Malug property, that's a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And Shliach, the last two cases that we just mentioned about the nature of agency, Shlucho shel Adam Kimoso or not, that's Pluked Rabbi Yochanan of Rabbi Yoshia. So here we go. We're going to go into both of these machloksim. Very great Gemara. So watch this. Baal, Pluked Rabbi Yochanan of Reish Lakish. So ultimately, the case of the husband, right, or really again the rights of the husband or the relationship of a husband to Nichsei Malug property. This is the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan of Reish Lakish. Here we go. The Itmar Hamocher Sadeo Lechavero Leperos. So we'll say now watch this. If a person goes ahead and sells a field to his friend for pears, so we'll say, so watch this case. Rashi actually points out over here. Rashi points out, Mocher Sadeh Leperos, Shiochal. It's actually almost right across in Rashi. It is right across in Rashi. Shiochal Lokech Peroseh Bezig Gimel Shanu VaAchrazman Tachsor LeBailim. So we'll say this is actually an interesting case. I sell a field to Ruvain. Now the way this works is that the nature of this field, the nature of this sale is Ruvain doesn't take possession of the field. Rather, what he's getting is, let's say, 3 seasons of produce. That's what he's getting. I'm selling him 3 seasons of produce. After he takes his 3 seasons of produce, what happens? Gives me back my field. Okay, so we'll say, so now the shaila is, comes Bikurim, comes Meseches, comes halach of Bikurim, you have to bring first fruits. So I will say, now when you bring first fruits, the halach is you say a series of psukim. So the shaila, I will say something very interesting over here. The shaila is, who gets to bring Bikurim? Is it the person who is entitled to the produce, or is it the person who is the titular owner of the land? That's the shaila. So the Gemara says, watch this. I sell my field to Ruvain, so he gets the rights to the produce. Rabbi Yochanan says that Ruvain has the right to go ahead and bring the Bikurim and read the Psukim. Reish Lakish Omer maybe ve'eno kar. Reish Lakish says he can bring the Bikurim, but he cannot go ahead and read the Psukim. There was, what's the pshat? What's the machlokes? Here we go. Rabbi Yochanan Omer maybe ve'kor. Rabbi Yochanan says he can bring Bikurim and read the Psukim, right? Because there's an accompanying parsha that is read. Maybe v'korei kinyan peros ke kinyan aguftami. Because Rabbi Yochanan holds that only right to produce are tantamount to actual ownership. Therefore, if whoever owns the rights to the produce is considered to be the owner of the land. And therefore, you could bring Bikurim, do the recitation. Beautiful. Reish Lakish says, no. You could bring the Bikurim, but you can't read the accompanying Psukim. Why? So the Gemara says, Kinyan Peros, Lav ke Kinyan Haguftami. Because ultimately, again, rights in Peros is not Kinyan Haguf. So I will say, so what does Bikurim have to do with Nichsei Malug? everything, because it's the same machlokes, right? A woman brings property into a marriage. It's her property, right? She retains title to that property. Husband has peros. I will say, who is considered to be the owner of that property for the duration of the marriage? Machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan, and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan will say that it's essentially the husband who is the owner, because since he has usage, usage equals ownership. Reish Lakish will say, no, he's not the owner, he has usage. But the woman is considered to be the complete owner of that property. So both say, so that same machlokes by Bikurim is the same machlokes by Nechsimilog, which entail will then trigger the same machlokes ultimately for Baal of Imo, who is considered to be the owner in order to be able to deal with cases of Baal of Imo. Incredible. Shliach, Plukti Rabbi Yonasan, Rabbi Yoshia. We'll say the case of Shliach is very interesting. His machlokes Rabbi Yonasan, Rabbi Yoshia. This Sanya, here we go. Ha'omer l'apotropis. A person says to an apotropis, because it's interesting. Kol nidarim shetehi ishti noderes mikan ach ava mimakom ploni haferla. So this is actually an interesting case on a variety of levels, right? So I'll say, so what happens? Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven is going out of town. Reuven says to he appoints an apotropis, right? Essentially a shaliach, right? Now, it goes in this case over here, the apotropis is kind of running his estate while he's gone. So the apotropis, by the way, while I'm gone, if my wife makes any nidarim, just annul them. Just annul them. Okay, right? Just annul them. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so now let's say again, Reuven's married to Rachel. Rachel's making nidarim, right? And now the apotropis annuls them. So the Gemara says, Yachol yuhu mufarin. You might have thought that they would be annulled. Talmud Lomar, Isha yikimeno v'isha yifireno di Rabbi Yosha. Rabbi Yosha says that doesn't work. That doesn't work. The only person who has power of annulment over a woman's vows ultimately is the husband, right? The woman does not have the right. Sorry, the apotropis doesn't have the right. Rabbi Yonasan says, Matzina b'chol makom sheshlucho shel adam kimoso. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, it's not true. We'll say there's the concept of shlucho shel adam kimoso. That's the whole concept of shlichos. What does shlichos say? What shlichos says is whatever I can do, my shliach could do as well. So therefore, technically speaking, you're going to point the shliach as well. So we'll say, so again, we're just pointing out over here that these are machloksim. These are machloksim. So in all the rights, in this case over here, I go ahead and I lend my cow to Reuven, and I say to my shaliach, go ahead and go into Reuven's employ at the time of the borrowing. Is that called Baal of Imo? Same machlokis of shlucho shel adam kimo. So incredible. Amali Rav Vilish l'Rava. Rav Vilish said to Rava, Omer la'avdo, seva hashalim parasi mau. So I said, now watch this other case. In this case, I'm lending my cow to Reuven. I'm the owner, I'm lending the cow to Reuven, and I have an Eved Kanani. I say to my Eved Kanani, go into the employ of Reuven when I go ahead and lend him the cow. So what's the halacha over here? Mau. So tibay leman damar shlucho shel adam kimoso, tibay leman damar shlucho shel adam eno kimoso. So I will say, so now in this case, I'm sending my Eved Kanani to be in the employ of Reuven when he borrows my cow. So I will say, so the shaila is that Baal of Imo or not? So the Gemara says, this is a shaila according to both opinions. Watch this. So even according to the opinion that says normally my shliach is an extension of me, normally I will say that extends to a shaliach who's like me, meaning a Jew. And a full-fledged Jew, even though Eved Kanani is kind of like a quasi-Jew, because he undergoes a partial gerus, becomes fully Jewish upon emancipation, right? But Lemaisa right now, he's not like me. Aval Eved Lad Bar Mitzvah Hulo. But maybe an Eved, literally again, who's not subject to mitzvah, so is not included in mitzvahs. Maybe the halacha is he can't be my full shaliach. O Dilma, Afilaman Damra Ein Shlucho Shel Adam Kimoso. Or again, even according to the opinion that says that normally an agent, right, is not an extension of the principle. That's true because he's a shaliach. He's someone separate. Aval eved yad eved ki yad rabo dam yolei. Now let's say, but an eved kanani will say, the eved's hand is my hand. So it's interesting about say how one can make the argument that maybe even an eved kanani, maybe even if you normally don't subscribe to the concept of shlucho shel adam kimoso, maybe by eved kanani you would. Very interesting. So mistabra yad eved ki yad rabo damya. We'll say it appears to be clear that ultimately, again, the hand of the eved is considered to be the hand of the Rebbe. Okay, so we'll say I just want to point out all of these questions that we also went through. The Gemara really doesn't solidify them. So kind of we'll look at them in but these are all open-ended questions so far. Next, just great questions. So we'll say this is an interesting case. a husband in his wife's property. So the Gemara says, Amud Beis, Shoel Havi, O Socher Havi. So this is very interesting. So I will say, so a husband in his wife, now this is her nichsei malog, right? So Reuven marries Rachel, Mazel Tov, Rachel brings property into the marriage, right? We're assuming over here, remember again, there's two types of property, nichsei malog, nichsei tzon barzal. Let's leave out nichsei tzon barzal, just called nichsei malog. Nichsei malog, so a woman brings this into the marriage. The halacha is, again, it is her property. It is her property. She retains title, but he gets complete usage. So now the Gemara asks is, so what is Reuven's relationship to this property? What's his relationship to it? Is he a shoel? Is he a borrower? Or is he a socher? Is he a renter? Now we'll say, what's the distinction? Look at Rashi. Shoel habi kasagalait chalis chayiv ba'onse behemos nichse malug shala shu oso el malachta. So obviously, what's the difference over here between being a shoel and a socher? What's the difference? Ones. Is he responsible for onsim or not? So it's a really interesting shaila. What is the halachic relationship between a husband and his wife's property? Okay, so here we go. So let's analyze this. Amar Rava, so remember, who's asking this question? This is Rabbi Bar Chama. Rabbi Bar Chama is asking this question, what is the nature of a husband's relationship to his wife's property? Is he a shoel or is he a socher? Amar Rava, lefum churfa shabeshta. But say this is such a great line. Rava says, literally again, because of his sharpness, he made a mistake. Now, what does that mean? So what Rava is essentially saying is, Rabbi Bar Chama, that's a terrible question, right? The question now, what he's attributing the unnecessary question to is Rabbi Bar Chama was very sharp. Sometimes when a person is sharp, they rush to ask, or they rush to analyze, or they rush to judgment without necessarily taking the time for necessary analysis. So it's a very profound lefum churfa shabeshta. Sometimes again, if you're too sharp, you end up making a lot of mistakes. Sometimes also when a person thinks, when I think that I know everything, I jump to certain conclusions without taking the necessary time to analyze and to just digest a little bit. Really, right. So therefore, Rabbi Bar Chama, pump the brakes for a second. Pump the brakes. The Gemara says, Manavshach. Let's analyze this. So Manavshach. I shoal havi shela babailami. So let's just play this through. Rabbi Bar Chama, right? You're suggesting that there are two possibilities as to what the husband's relationship with his wife's property is. Okay, let's go through this. If he's a shoel, then he's never going to be chayiv. Why will he never be chayiv? We'll say, why? Ba'alavimo. Right? Listen to this. I shoel havi shela babailami. Now we'll say, now watch this. Why is it ba'alavimo? Look at Rashi. Shela babailamu. So we'll say, this is actually incredible. Let's play this out. Who owns the property? Rachel, right? So now, when does the property come to Reuven, the husband? When? At the time of their marriage. At the time of the marriage, she is also, quote unquote, in his employ. What does that mean? There are certain obligations that a wife has towards a husband, just like the obligations that a husband has towards a wife. So I will say, so the obligations that a wife has towards her husband makes her, so to speak, working for him right at the time of the borrowing, so to speak. So if you hold that he's a shoel, then he's never going to be chayiv for anything because it's balavimo. So fascinating. Look at Rashi. Shela bailami shehi imo tadir b'malachto. Right? She's always with him, quote unquote, b'malachto, working for him. And I would say, I just want to point out, what does it mean? What does it mean working for him? I just want to be clear. What it means is Chazal outlined that there are responsibilities that a wife has towards a husband, just like there are responsibilities that a husband has towards a wife. Those halachically mandated responsibilities really make them in the employ of one another. That's really what's happening over here. See, if you hold that the husband is a shohel, so again, he's going to be pater for everything because it's balavimo. Okay, isocher havischiros b'bailimi. And I will say, by the way, what we've established is based on also other pieces. I didn't mention this before. One of the things we established on yesterday's daf is the p'tur of bal of imo applies to who? Applies to everyone. Right? Now, the truth is, in yesterday's daf, we really only applied Bal of Imo, right, to Shol, which is written in, Shomer Sachar, which is the section before, and Shomer Chilim, which is two sections before. But by Pashtus, if he's going to apply to those three, he's also going to apply to Socher, Ella, so let's say, see here what's happening over here? So therefore again comes along Rav, and Rav says, what are you asking? What do you mean? Is the husband like a shul, like a silchar? Calm down, because truth is he's most probably not like either of those. Because if he actually has either of that status shul or silchar, he's never going to be chayiv for anything, because halacha l'maisa, that's always going to be ba'al avimo. Ella ki kami baile. Rather I will say, what's the machlokas? Right, what's the question? Ki kami baile. L'roi bar chama. Sorry, the agar mina para v'hadar nasba. So I said, this is interesting. Watch this case. Reuven is not married to Rachel. Reuven is not married to Rachel. He goes ahead and he borrows a cow from her, or he rents a cow from her, and then he marries her. Right? They got to know each other through the rental. Right? Baruch Hashem. Right? It went well. They enjoyed dealing with each other. And now what happens? He marries her. So Rabbi says, so now here's what's interesting. Shoel Havi or Socher Havi. So Rabbi says, now that he married her, his relationship with the cow, right? What happens to that? What happens to that? Ultimately, again, is he considered to be a shoel? So Rabbi says, remember again, I want to point out what happened in this case is he rented it from her, right? So he's a renter. So the shaila is now after they get married, does his relationship as a renter, does that still remain? Or maybe now because that cow is nichse malug, right? His rentership is essentially transformed into an act of borrowing, into she'ila. So the Gemara says, Shal havi v'as yeshe'ila b'baylim mafka schiru shelo b'baylim. So I'll say, so do we say that ultimately he's a borrower? He's a borrower, and I will say not only is he a borrower, but he's a borrower with Baal of Imo, and therefore again essentially has no more liability for this animal, and therefore we say that ultimately and ultimately again this she'ela b'baylim will come and uproot the act of the rental. Odo, the other possibility is Socher Havi. No. He's going to be a renter. Uschiras kidekaima kaima. And the rental will remain as it was. In other words, we'll say, since maybe this rental took place before the marriage, therefore the rental remains intact for the duration of the marriage. Right? And that's it. Whatever it is, and it doesn't morph with the marriage. So we'll say, see here the Shaila? So in other words, what Rav is suggesting is like this. In terms of a husband's relationship with Nichsei Malug, whether he is a shoel or a socher, it's not going to matter, because either way, he's pater. Right? Either way, he's going to be pater because it's Baal of Imo. The real shaila becomes is, Reuven rented an animal from Rachel before they got married. Now they got married. What happens to the rental? Does the rental stay as it is, unchanged by marriage, or no? Now that they're married, the rental transforms into a shel, into an act of borrowing, and it's borrowing b'baylim ba'lavimo, and therefore again, no liability. So the Gemara says, umayshna di shol havi da asi shel b'baylim mafkes schir shel b'baylim. So we'll say, so let's analyze this. What does it matter? So you told me if he was a shol, di shol havi, right? If he was a shoel, so we'll say let's say for argument's sake he was a shoel beforehand. And now what would happen? Now that he got married, it becomes an act of sheila b'baylim, right? Ba'lavimo, and ultimately again he'd be pater. So schiros shalob. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Umayshna ti shol havi da asi sheila b'baylim mafkas schir shalob b'baylim. I socher nami havi teises schiros b'baylim teifok le schir shalob b'baylim. See here's what's interesting. What the Gemara is suggesting is either way he should be pater. Right? Why? Because I will say the act of marriage, by definition, makes this a situation of Baal of Imo. Right? That's what really is happening over here. So whether he's a socher or whether he's a shoel, does not the mere act of marriage suddenly make this a case of Baal of Imo? Teach Gemara says, you're right. Elaki kami ba'ilan, what's the shaila? Kigon da'agra ihi para me'alma v'hadr nasba. Okay, watch this. Gemara says, you're right. Here's the shaila we're dealing with. Rachel borrowed a cow from Shimon, whatever, a totally unrelated party. Now we'll say, now what happens? She did this before she got married. An independent woman, she rented her own cow. So we'll say, so now what happens? Now she gets married to Reuven. Okay, Bahadr Nasba. So we'll say, so now what's the shaila? Valiba d'Rabbanan da'amri shoel mishalim l'socha. So we'll say, so now watch this. If you understand that the husband is a shoel, is a borrower in his wife's property, okay? So I'll say, so now, just to understand all the relationships here. Rachel rented the cow from Shimon. Rachel marries Reuven. This is nichsei malug. As nichsei malug, Reuven has the right to use nichsei malug, and we're presupposing now that Reuven is a shoel in the property of his wife, okay? So Reuven's using the cow. right, within his rights. Now what happens? The cow dies. Or the cow is stolen. Something happens. Now let's say, now something happens in a way. Now, what's Ruvain's liability if something happens? What's his liability? Ruvain. 0, right? Why? Why? He's a shoel. Interestingly enough, but Rachel has responsibility to who? To the owner of the object, i.e. Shimon. So watch this. So the Gemara says, the agra ihi para me'alma. So she went ahead and she rented a cow. So the Gemara says, v'hadir nasba v'aliba d'rabbanan da'amri shoel mishalim l'socher lo tibay lecha devade shela b'ayam. So we'll say, so again, in this kind of case, if you're speaking about the liability, ultimately, again, that the owner, let's say in this case, according to Rabbanan who say that the shoel pays back the renter, so in this case over here, the shoel is not going to be chayiv anything to the renter. Why not? Because the shoel is Ruvain, the husband, right? It's a case of balavimo, therefore he's totally off the hook. Kiti bailacha, so where does it become a shayla? And therefore, we'll say again, now Ruvain is off the hook, Rachel's not going to be off the hook, right? Rachel's still going to owe an animal back to Shimon. So we'll say, where does the shayla come up? Kiti ba'ilacha, alibad Rabbi Yossi damar tachsar para labailim harishonim mai. So we'll say, but according to Rabbi Yossi, who says that ultimately, again, there is liability from the from the shoel, who's Ruvain, the husband, to the owner of the animal. What's talacha? Shal havi o socher havi? Is Ruvain, the husband, considered to be a shoel or a socher in his wife's property? Okay, so I will say, so just all of this was triggered by Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama is trying to figure out what is the halachic nature of a husband's usage of his wife's nichsei malug. Is he considered to be a borrower, a shoel, or a renter, a socher? And that has many different ramifications. To which the Gemara now says, Amar Rava, the Gemara says, first of all, again, you guys have it all wrong. Baal lo shoel havi, v'lo socher havi. A husband is neither a borrower nor is he a renter in his wife's property. So what is it? Ella lokeach havi. He is accorded the status of a purchaser, of a lokeach. Neither, not a shol, not a socher, but a lokeach. Mid Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Dam Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Bo'usha eskinu. Listen to this. In Usha, they instituted ha'isha shemach rabbi nichsei malug b'chaye baila, that if a woman goes ahead and sells her nichsei malug while her husband is alive. So in other words, we'll say Rachel is married to Ruvain. Rachel is married to Ruvain, and she goes ahead and she has nichsei malug. She sells that malug property. What's talacha? Umesa, and then she dies. Now remember again, technically speaking, she has title to that property, and therefore she's entitled to sell it. She goes ahead and she sells it. Now she dies. Haba motzi miyad alakuchos. The husband has the right to go ahead and seize that property, ultimately again from the purchasers. So what do you see from here, says Rava? You have it all wrong. A husband's relationship to the wife's property is like a first position purchaser. He's a lokech, he's a purchaser, he's an owner. He's an owner. Now again, his ownership is not the same, obviously, again, as his wife's, right? Because technically speaking, she does have the right to sell it, but yet, interestingly enough, when she dies, he has the ability to extract it from any purchasers. So therefore, again, Rava comes along and says, guys, the question is flawed from the beginning. He's not a shoel and he's not a socher, he's a purchaser. He's a purchaser, totally different type of relationship to the property. Now, based on this, the Gemara asks an interesting question. Let's at least begin this today. So I will say this is a very interesting case. This is a very interesting case. So Rachel's married to Ruvain. Rachel inherits property from her father. Let's say her father died, and she is the sole inheritor. So what happens? Now this is fascinating. What happens? So now, let's say included in that property is hekdesh. It's consecrated items. Money. Now, neither Rachel nor Ruvain knew about this. So what happens? So now the shayla is, so now who has committed a me'ilah? Is it Rachel, who is technically speaking the titular owner of this, or Ruvain, who has rights of usage? Who is the owner? So we'll say, Rava, man limol. So we'll say, okay, so let's analyze this. Limol bal de ter nechale dilikne, isur lo nechale dilikne. So we'll say, I can say the husband, why should the husband be over a me'ilah? From his perspective. And we'll say, no, we'll stop over here for today. We'll say, by the way, great job, really a lot of Gemara today, great Gemara today. I know a lot of unanswered questions, and sometimes that can be a little bit frustrating, but here's the Musar HaSkil. Still with unanswered questions, we still move forward. forward. We still move forward in the Emirat Hashem. The good news is the answers will come. We just have to be patient, both for this Blat Gemara as well as in life. Shkoyach.